Hi guys, Shinra here, back with another YouTube video. The type of content I'm going to be doing now, at least for this specific video, is going to be reminiscent, sort of, a prologue to the other sort of videos that I'm going to be doing in the future. I want to dive more into Sakamoto Days, and who better to help me with Sakamoto Days than the supposed Sakamoto Days master in the form of Yani. He's a very good friend of mine, also my honorary son. So Yani, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, the name is Yani, and the game is Sakamoto Days. I'm the father of the Shinra, and I'm here to teach him and you guys some Sakamoto Days scaling.
Yeah, and this is not to say that all of my content is going to be centered around Sakamoto Days. Rather, I just think that this matchup is so interesting, I couldn't really drop it immediately. And the matchup is just, as you've already seen by the title, whether or not Prime Sakamoto would be able to beat Takamura. These two characters, by consensus, have been considered to be top two characters in the verse. I don't think anyone really contests that it's either Sakamoto or Takamura. Rather, they just have infights between who is stronger between the two, which obviously can be answered due to recent events that have happened in the series. Spoilers for whoever hasn't been caught up yet, but Takamura actually dies by Uzuki's hand. So again, this sort of fantasy matchup that we've always wanted to see, we'll just never be able to see it. However, I think using the sort of information we've gotten through this series and through statements made by each of these characters, we can make a healthy comparison between the two and determine who's really stronger. So to start off with, whenever Sakamoto is initially introduced, he's told to the audience that he is the top assassin. Just by existing and his skill as an assassin, we see that he makes evildoers and people who do wrong and have obviously assassinations put on their head, that they cower in fear, and he sets in sort of like an era of peace just due to his skill as an assassin alone. The thing that sets him apart from people like Takamura, people like Nagumo, people like even Shin, the thing that sets him apart specifically is just he has the ability to use anything in his environment as a weapon. So for example, whenever he's going against one of his friends, I think it's the trio who made it out of the JCC, him, Nagumo and Akira, he's stated to be able to beat her 100 out of 100 times in a closed room simply because he's able to use everything in his environment to win and beat other people. But after he's experienced a long period of retirement due to obviously falling in love and his wife doesn't like killing, the sort of weakness he's gotten is obviously he's become really fat. He's gotten a daughter, which would obviously be a clear decrease in terms of his stats. But the most important thing is that he no longer kills people, and because he no longer kills people, he's unable to use the environment how he would like to usually, because obviously in the past, most of the time in which he's using his environment is determined to be able to kill people. However, even despite this, even in his old retired form, when Shin tries to assassinate him early on within the series, we see that he's actually able to easily defeat him, even using the suites that are located around the environment to be able to deflect bullets and just deflect every single attack that Shin throws out against them. But even if you don't like the fact that Sakamoto's become really fat, then I have some news for you, because in his fight against Boiled, it's revealed that Sakamoto is actually able to burn off all his fat near instantaneously, turning reminiscent into his prime form even though he's much weaker, and overwhelm people like Boiled. And despite everything, Boiled is actually quite strong, and people tend to underrate him for unknown reasons, but I'll leave it up to Yani to explain why Boiled is really strong.
Yeah, so Boiled, surprisingly, like, people seem to underrate Boiled, but when you actually look at the feats that Boiled has in the series, he's able to contest Shin. And even if you look towards the start of his fight with Sakamoto, he was destroying Sakamoto, especially in the way that the anime depicts it. Sakamoto stood no chance against Boiled initially, until he had to go into his slim form. And then that's the same fat Sakamoto, at least a similar fat Sakamoto, who's able to fight and completely dismantle a part. So like Boiled, we should put respect on him. He also goes in the prison arc and fights Shin, and does surprisingly well towards the start of the prison arc. And this is a Shin who just got off of fighting Haruma, who's able to Haruma, who has a lot of speed feats, like, keeping up with Takamura in some portions of the fight. But I don't want to talk about Takamura too much.
Yeah, in addition to this, whenever Goku actually takes over the body of Shinaya and easily begins overwhelming both Shin and all of his acquaintances who are there, we see that immediately Sakamoto gets involved. He's able to easily overwhelm Goku. Now, granted, this Goku is under a delay and he's also far weaker because this isn't actually his body that he's manipulating. It's the body of a basic teenager. But the fact that Sakamoto is able to overwhelm someone like him with such ease shows the gap between himself and the people around him, himself and all of the other people who he's taken in under his little pseudo family. So even inside of his fat form, he's able to overwhelm this Goku, well, not Goku level, but Goku reminiscent opponent. And although I won't say suddenly just because of this feat alone he's on Goku's level, I would like to add even further that even despite all of this, he's also holding back, not just because he doesn't want to kill, but also because he's fighting somebody who's in the body of an innocent child. So there's good reason for him to be restraining himself to such a severe extent. So suddenly to say that Sakamoto, just because he's out of his prime, is any weaker or far below members of the order is just a bit of a far stretch. Additionally, we see even in his fat form, whenever he engages with Takamura, which we'll get into this later, but I just want to brush up on this. Whenever he engages with Takamura, we see in his fat form, he's actually able to dodge one of his slashes, although he goes on to perform way better whenever he becomes slim. But again, it's just something to know. But as Yani said previously, Sakamoto is actually able to easily dismantle a part who is cutting up large buildings like it's nothing. And the fact that he's able to do this while holding back and also while trying to get through to him actually just makes Sakamoto seem more monstrous, and it makes us wonder what he'd be like in his prime. Additionally, one of Sakamoto's old acquaintances tells us that Sakamoto currently, even in his slim form, is around 30% of his strength in his prime. Now, whether or not you want to take this to mean he's actually physically so much weaker than he was in his prime, if so, then the matchup would begin to become a bit obvious. Or you want to take it that in terms of assassination skill, he's become far worse, because then at least you'd have way more grounding on this type of thing, because you could say that obviously the game of assassination is killing the person who you're targeting, and obviously since Sakamoto doesn't kill anymore, you could obviously make that sort of explanation. However, again, we just see quite consistently that the members of the order who try and attack Sakamoto, even in the current arcs, they need to actually mental nerf him before they engage completely. These sort of things show that the order is quite actually wary of Sakamoto and wary of his strength. So again, downplaying slim Sakamoto currently is just not the move to make. And I think if we begin talking about prime Sakamoto, which I'm sure Yani can touch up on now, prime Sakamoto is just a complete monster compared to this.
Yeah, so Prime Sakamoto has been just stated to be unkillable. Shikiba, who's a member of the Order, when asked about Sakamoto's chances when surviving, like I forgot the name of the character, but it was one of the characters in the earlier arcs. Shishiba was posed with a question on Sakamoto's survivability, and then Shishiba just states that Sakamoto is unkillable. He says he cannot imagine Sakamoto dying. Right, and then this is a Shishiba who has knowledge on every single member of the Order, including Takamura and other characters like Oki and Nagumo and Osaragi. This is a Shishiba who's seen, the top tiers fight, and then he believes that he can't even imagine anybody defeating and killing Sakamoto. And I think that ties in with Sakamoto's ability to adapt. But the whole point of the Torres and Sakamoto fight was to make a distinction between current Sakamoto and prime Sakamoto. The distinction that they make in the Torres fight is such that prime Sakamoto had the ability to use all aspects of the environment simultaneously, and current Sakamoto does not have that aspect. We see this when Torres is advising Sakamoto to use only one weapon, and then Sakamoto lets him into his home, and then it's only upon Torres watching Sakamoto cook and watching Sakamoto's wife cook but he's like, oh shit, Sakamoto and his wife can use all these cooking tools simultaneously. I wonder why he doesn't do this in his fights. And that seems to be the missing component that's preventing current Sakamoto to becoming prime Sakamoto. A prime Sakamoto will be able to use all aspects of the environment to his advantage in any fight against anybody, and that makes him unkillable, like Shishiba stated.
Yeah, additionally, whenever he's in his JCC days, we know that he's actually quite of a rival to Naguma. Naguma, who is stated to be top 2 in the order, only below people who are like Takamura, which is obvious because Takamura is basically just like a demon god compared to the rest of the people there. But again, whenever he's in his JCC days, we see that he's able to take down someone like Kindaka, who was actually co-leading the order at the time. Additionally, we know that Kindaka has just been praised as being the fastest assassin alive due to his light speed shoes, supposedly. Whenever they ask who is stronger between him and Naguma immediately notices that, oh, this will be trouble. If this guy actually begins to attack me, it will be a bit troublesome. So instead, he does the rational option and he leaves it up to the person who is stronger than him by being truthful. I know many people like to say, oh yeah, Naguma is just a consistent liar, and I agree, Naguma is a consistent liar, but however, the times in which he lies, almost every single time is because it acts in his benefit, right? Again, being honest and diverting the opponent's attention away from himself, right, through his honesty it would be to his benefit, because obviously he doesn't want to put himself in needless danger, right? So again, I think that Naguma is being quite honest in his assessment of Sakamoto. It makes no real sense how, like, for example, Naguma would be the stronger of the two, and then suddenly, after only a few years, suddenly Takamura is now the big, or Sakamoto I should say, is now the big bad of the assassin world, if there was no real distinction between the two, right? I think, again, it would just make no narrative sense to say that, like, Naguma would be stronger here. And additionally, I just think that since someone like Kindaka is supposed to be a rival to Yotsumura, who even in his weakened state is able to keep up with people like Shishiba, it's just safe to say that JCC Sakamoto is already on the level of the order, and that isn't even getting close to near how strong Prime Sakamoto is. So again, I think we've gone over Prime Sakamoto and his scaling implications enough, and I think we can segue into Takamura's section. So Yoni, I think you can cover a bit of this.
Takamura, he has so much aspects to his scaling that would make people think that he's the strongest. I mean, I don't even know what to start with. There's the stat cards. The stat cards just show that he has infinite stats in every single aspect that they list. This is inclusive to things like marksmanship, things like weapon adaptability, things like potential to grow, things like physical strength, and things like not just physical strength, but like all physical aspects. So, like, the stat cards seem to say that he's the strongest in all of these aspects. Like, he's a better marksman than characters like Kamihate, which is implied from the stat cards. And he also has the greatest swordsmanship, as stated in the data books as well. He also has the ability to cut anything into two. He also fights the entirety of the characters, or like the main cast in the in the museum. I'm tripping. So he fights Haruma, Uzuki, Naguma, Sakamoto in this kind of like gauntlet style fight, and not to mention he fights Gaku as well. So like he has like a whole array of feats, and you can even say that Taka Uzuki, who is a copy of Takamura, who is stated to closely resemble Takamura in terms of strength, also has feats as well that scale Takamura high. Taka Uzuki almost kills Osaragi. Taka Uzuki, beats up Shishiba. Taka Uzuki runs a 2v1 with Shishiba and Osaragi at the same time, and then he goes on to fight Shishiba and Kamihate at the same time. So there's this whole array of feats. Even the fact that in the initial fight, he cut off Gaku's arm with a single swing, and then he later on cut off his own arm and reattached it in the middle of a fight. Like, Takamura has an insane array of feats that range from not only his speed, but his technique and his destructive capability. Like, we remember when he cut down massive buildings, won the size of the Eiffel Tower. It's insane.
Yeah, so again, I think the main thing that people seem to ignore whenever they're talking about Takamura's scaling is just, one, his fight against Gaku. So again, the author goes out of his way to tell us that Gaku is no slouch. Gaku is actually pretty strong on the level of the order. Whenever he's fighting Naguma flat out says that, oh yeah, this guy might actually, like, not only does his ability to instantly adapt remind him of Sakamoto back in his day, which could be the JCC or it could be Prime Sakamoto, But he also says that Gaku is the strongest opponent he's ever faced, right? We see that he says, oh, he can't beat him in a punch out, so he decided to use underhanded tactics. However, someone like Takamura doesn't need to do any of that. Immediately upon sensing Takamura is about to arrive, even Gaku becomes shook. He's able to notice his presence before like Takamura even makes his arrival. Every single attack he does against Gaku takes off at least some of his limbs, but Gaku is able to easily shrug it off. We know that at least in terms of the stat cards, whether or not you think they're accurate is dubious, right? Again, his ability, his potential to grow, for example, if that's a stat, right? You could say, oh yeah, this is actually backed up by the fact that we see, for example, even though he's getting older, and even though like his time, he should be getting older and getting weaker because he's getting older, right? He's still just actually getting stronger compared to when he's in the order. There's a statement that says, oh, by Sakamoto, by the way, oh, compared to the time in which I was in the order, he's much stronger. There are two interpretations people like to take with this. One, which is that whenever Sakamoto was in the order, Takamura is much stronger than him, right? And the other that says that he's just way stronger compared to when Sakamoto last saw him. But I think Yanni could expand more on this compared to me in this instance.
Yeah, there's just one thing that I would like to add, like in regards to Takamura and even in regards to Gaku as well. Gaku, when he's with Uzuki, when Uzuki is with Gaku, like when they're all together, right? They're all like drafting up plans for the museum, like how to invade the museum and destroy the museum. And then obviously, like they're aware of Takamura's presence. And Uzuki, who is just fresh off of seeing Takamura fight Gaku, is posed with the question, who is going to fight Takamura? And then like they all exchange like just silent glances and they all look at Gaku, you know, kind of indicating that Gaku's the strongest. And Gaku looks back at them and he says, not likely. This means that Gaku believes nobody in that room, inclusive of himself, is likely to defeat Takamura and kill him or defeat him in the first place. Like, so like, yeah, like, in respects between Gaku and Takamura, like Gaku just kind of cooks down to him. He even goes to the exhibit, the museum exhibit, with the whole goal of fighting Takamura in the first place because he considers him a worthy opponent.
Yeah, so again, it's also just the fact that they think that because like Takamura is so strong, people actually start considering him a myth, right? And again, it's kind of easy to imagine he's an old man who can barely see but reacts to killing intent, right? Obviously, you can get where they're coming from. However, again, it's just the fact that nobody can possibly conceive of themselves defeating Takamura, right? Nagumo says quite like verbatim that, oh yeah, the only person who I could imagine killing Takamura is Takamura, right? And again, it's the sort of statement that like Aomine makes it when like Kuroko no Basket, he says, oh yeah, the only one who can beat me is me. It's the same sort of thing in like Uzuki's instance. We see that whenever Uzuki is fighting Sakamoto, he doesn't suddenly build up a new personality out of fear to survive and copy Sakamoto. Instead, he only does this type of thing whenever he's engaging with Takamura, right? Again, we know that these sort of new personalities he makes are out of fear, and the only reason he could be making one against Takamura is just he's actually afraid of Takamura because of his strength, and this sort of reaction doesn't seem to be shared whenever you're talking about Sakamoto, whether it be because you think, oh yeah, Takamura has less of an agreeable personality than Sakamoto, therefore if Takamura comes to kill you, he's more likely to just kill you straight away compared to Takamura. Again, those sort of interpretations, I think they're quite ad hoc. They don't really have much actual evidence behind them, but in terms of law at least, we know that Takamura just has the real heavy baggage compared to his, or attached to his name I should say. But the most important thing we need to get into whenever we're talking about how Takamura and Sakamoto compare to each other is the actual fight they have on screen. And I think that Yanni, you can cover this fight specifically because it's a bit blurry in my own memory.
Okay, so contrary to the public opinion, I think it was a genuinely close fight. I think Sakamoto had a great performance and even came close to killing Takamura. So towards the start of the fight, we see like Fat Sakamoto, Nagumo, and Uzuki all together, and then that's when Takamura comes out of nowhere and kind of lunges towards them. They notice him before he lunges though, and then Fat Sakamoto, Nagumo, and Uzuki are all able to dodge, and then Uzuki gets chased down and gets hit. Nagumo tries to save Uzuki and he gets hit as well. So now the fight should primarily be between Sakamoto and then Takamura. And Sakamoto, who's still in his fat state, is transforms back to his slim state and kicks Takamura away. Takamura blocks it, and then Nagamo states, "Oh yeah, Sakamoto, don't fight Takamura." But then later on in the fight, after Sakamoto just consistently dodges Takamura, he's not getting hit by Takamura. He eventually grabs a blade, and then he's able to fight almost, I'd say, equally with Takamura, using his blade for a few minutes whilst just dodging his flashes. Sakamoto then figures out Takamura's attack pattern, where he sheathes and unsheathes his sword every few swings. Then it gets to the point where Sakamoto achieves his goal of wearing down Takamura's blade. He wears down Takamura's blade. He pulls out the gun. Nagamo, Uzuki, and everyone else in the room are all in shock. Nagamo kind of retracts his earlier statement where he thinks that Sakamoto couldn't win. Nagamo at that point in time believed that Sakamoto could have won. And then obviously Sakamoto shoots at Takamura. Takamura sharpens his blade with the bullets, and then he slices down Sakamoto. But that's not an anti-feat against Sakamoto. I mean, Sakamoto was in the air. He, didn't expect this to happen. He couldn't have done anything against Takamura's sword slash. So overall, an impressive performance where he almost defeated Takamura. He just forgot to account for Takamura's insanely large skill with the sword. And knowing that Prime Sakamoto is exponentially better with utilizing the environment, it could have been a lot different if it was in their primes.
Yeah, and also I'd just like to add that if we compare, for example, Gaku's performance against Sakamoto to someone like Slim Sakamoto's, we can see that in almost every single swing that Takamura does against Gaku, he's taking off at least a limb. So for example, in one of his initial swings, we see he's able to take off his ear and also take off his fingers because Gaku is unable to dodge properly, and he's also damaging the environment around him. And we see this same sort of trend is consistent against Slim Sakamoto. However, Slim Sakamoto doesn't really get tagged even once. He only gets tagged whenever he's mid-air, which wouldn't really be a bad thing because he's again put in a position where he can barely dodge. However, the thing that we need to address particularly is whether or not Takamura is going all out against someone like Gaku, against someone like Slim Sakamoto, because this is the sort of point that many people will bring up. Again, me personally, I don't think Takamura has much motivation to hold back. However, again, people might see it differently. So Yanni, maybe you could explain why people think that he's holding back.
Bro.
Okay, but yeah, while Yanni is gone, I guess I'll do the explanation for him, because me personally, I don't think that he'd actually hold back, specifically because of a few things. One, we know that someone like Takamura is someone who actually lacks much self-control. Whenever he sees killing intent directed at him, whether or not somebody actually acts upon it, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to attack now and then listen to questions later. So for example, whenever a fly goes past him, he immediately cuts the van open, causing all of his supposed allies to actually need to duck down to evade the slash. So he could have potentially killed almost all of his allies if there were anyone else and if they were slow enough, right? And the fact that he puts them in such life-altering risk just because of a little killing intent directed at him from an insect which couldn't even harm him if it wanted to, that sort of thing implies that Takamura isn't one to actually take any sort of rationale. He doesn't rationalize. Instead, he just sees this like a robot. He sees someone direct killing intent and he kills it. That's how his mind works, right? Again, and if his mind works in such a fashion, I don't know and I don't understand how people could fathom this guy just goes around and he holds back specifically against Sakamoto. It just isn't, it doesn't make any sense to me specifically. Again, whenever people say that Takamura is holding back against Sakamoto, it doesn't click. Again, typically whenever people are holding back, there's some sort of indication, right? And this sort of indication is just completely missing whenever he's fighting Sakamoto. But yeah, maybe Yanni knows some secret stuff about Takamura that I don't. Go ahead.
The kind of reasons people think that Takamura was holding back. To be clear, by the way, people, at least in my experiences, nobody says that Takamura was holding back for the majority of the fight or in all portions of the fight. They say that Takamura was holding back in specific instances, like when Sakamoto was able to press Takamura using a knife. And the reason they cite for this is the fact that it's consistent that Takamura is able to blitz certain characters, yet he's also able to clash with them in the same fashion that Sakamoto clashed with Takamura. So the main example of this is Haruma and Gaku being able to clash in the exact same kind of sequence. It's drawn the exact same that that Sakamoto and Takamura clashed with. Haruma and Gaku were able to replicate the exact same thing. But as we know, Haruma was blitzed by Takamura. So the only explanation we have is either Takamura gets exponentially stronger during the fight, which makes absolutely no sense, or Takamura was holding back in those specific portions of the fight, maybe to find an opportunity to kill that's more preferable to him. We also see the same thing with Shishiba and Takamura, where Shishiba and Takamura have the exact same sequence that Gaku, Haruma, and Sakamoto have against Takamura as well. Shishiba, who obviously scales to Usaragi, and Usaragi gets blitzed apparently by Taka Uzuki, who should be relative to Takamura. Although these kinds of arguments are a bit contentious to me, because I don't think Takamura has ever blitzed Haruma. Haruma was in the air, he couldn't really dodge. I don't think he ever blitzed Gaku. Gaku was in the air, he couldn't really dodge. I don't think he ever blitzed Sakamoto. Sakamoto was in the air, he couldn't dodge. And Usaragi swung towards, in fact, Usaragi ran towards Takamura, Taka Uzuki, if anything. So I don't know, the kind of arguments people use are a bit weak, in my opinion.
I mean, so people like to treat Takamura like he's some blitz king, like he goes around like Hindaka, instantly blitzing people, but really that isn't true. I think the whole thing behind Takamura's style is efficiency. We see after every few times, I don't think I can pronounce it properly, but I think it's called AI in Japan, whether you just pull out your sword and you cut immediately. That's the type of thing he does. After a few swings, he puts it back, then instantly unleashes a slash. So again, immediately he finds his opponent in a preferable position, he's going to just slash at them immediately and one-shot them. He's sort of a one-shot king, right? So again, in instances whenever people are sort of pushing back against him, not really giving him the opportunity to just do that one slash that's supposed to take off their head, right? We see he's unable to actually, keep up as much, right? But again, granted, none of these people in all of these clashes they have with him even managed to land a single clean hit on him at all. When in contrast, whenever they are not in close quarters, Takamura is able to hit them. So maybe you could say that the reason why he's able to overwhelm them is because they don't possess the sort of versatility that someone like Prime Sakamoto does, where he's able to use everything to his advantage, which could overwhelm the sort of options that or overwhelm the efficiency that Takamura is famous for, right? But I think with this, we've gone over most of the content that these people have, so I think we can just explain who we personally think wins, and I think you can go ahead, Yani, with this.
So this isn't anything insane. It's not some brand new scaling. It's not anything crazy, right? It's just chapter 1, page 1. Sakamoto, the strongest assassin. Although he's the former strongest, the data books say that he's the former strongest assassin, I just have no reason to believe that Takamura surpassed Sakamoto. There's plenty of opportunities if the author wanted to, Suzuki. If Suzuki wanted to go ahead and just present Takamura as his greatest, strongest assassin of all time, there would be a direct statement or any type of indication. The kinds of implications that people use are a bit too implicit for my liking. The only explicit kind of argument I've seen in favor of Takamura being above Sakamoto is through the stat cards, and in Takamura's case, in many cases generally, but especially in Takamura's case, the stat cards are not a good line of reasoning. You fine if I wait, Shinra, are you fine if I give the argument for that, or
Yeah, no, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so the argument is quite simple. It depends on what you take infinite stats to be. If you take infinite stats to be an immeasurable, his stats are immeasurably high, or they're immeasurable in general, I'm fine with biting the bullet and saying, yeah, okay, fine, his stats are immeasurable, so we can't know his stats. That's fine. That doesn't mean that he's above Sakamoto now. That's also implied from the bottom section of the stat cards. But what people like to argue is that the infinite are meant to mean that he exceeds the limit set by the stat cards, which is a stat number of 6. Now, this is especially problematic because Uzuki, a character who's able to copy the stats of other characters, only has a potential stat of 6. And they obviously, they explicitly state in his stat card, the stat card section, they say that his ability to copy is a way in which he can get stronger. So that should be a part of his potential. If his potential is, you know, his ability to get stronger, and copying people is a way in which he can get stronger, and he has the potential to copy Takamura, his potential stats should be above a 6. Because Takamura's stats are above 6s. But obviously, his potential stat is a 6. So, you know, Takamura's stats aren't above 6s or anything. I just think the infinite stat thing is just meant to be, oh yeah, he's like immeasurably strong, or like he's immeasurable in general. Nobody knows anything about him. I think that fits the narrative way more than him just being like the strongest for absolutely no reason. He shouldn't have, you know, more weapon adaptability than characters like Nagamo and Sakamoto, because Torres explicitly states that, well, Torres states that most assassins master one weapon. And then, for an example, the author Suzuki puts an image of Takamura in the background as an example of a character who has mastered only one weapon, as opposed to characters that have mastered multiple weapons. So it doesn't make sense for his weapon application ability to be above the likes of Sakamoto and Nagamo's, who have mastered multiple weapons apart from just one. The stat card argument doesn't really make sense, and that's the strongest kind of argument that the Takamura fans use to scale him above Prime Sakamoto. So yeah.
Yeah, I think with that, I can also just express my own, agreement. I personally think that Prime Sakamoto is the best, mainly because, I mean, at the start of the series, they just say he's the top assassin. Now, I don't know how else you could be a good assassin aside from your ability to kill people really quickly. Obviously, if Sakamoto is just the best at killing people, that would also transfer that he's also the best at being able to kill someone like Takamura. Additionally, we just see from his performances against Takamura, whenever they do find the museum, he just isn't immediately overwhelming him. If Takamura is supposed to be a rival to Prime Sakamoto, yet he's unable to instantly overwhelm Sakamoto currently, who's only 20% of his efficiency, 20% of his strength as he is in his prime, then again it just seems to imply that the gap is quite big. I think again the reason why people have these sort of high estimations of Takamura is simply because, oh my god, he's the really strong old man, and also just because of the fact that the way Takamura fights, it's quite hard for you to actually determine how strong he is. So for example, whenever he's landing these sort of finishing or critical blows against people like Gaku, right, we see that he's mainly in the air, he's in a disadvantageous positions, right, he's unable to actually properly move his body in a way in which he could dodge, right. These sort of situations that he's able to catch his opponent out in and instantly defeat them, I think that's what defines his strength. And because that is the defining trait, nobody is really able to actually determine or actually able to sense how fast is this guy, how strong is this guy. All they know is that he's really fast, he's really strong. But again, I think infinite in this context could also just mean immeasurable, right? Whether you think it means immeasurable because it's too big, or whether or not you think it's immeasurable because of external factors, I think it's the second one. I think it's the latter. But again, I think this is enough to talk about the topic. Talking about Sakamoto, this has been really fun. I'd like to do this again. If you like these type of videos, please remember to like and subscribe. This has been Shinra, that was Yani, and we're out.